Can I start, as we always do, in opening this conference, acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Whadjuk clan of the Noongar people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. And thank you so. I've had occasion to remark to Professor Hayward before that I never leave one of her welcomes to country uneducated. And we've been privileged to hear an explanation of the structure of the traditional ownership of this area. And I haven't heard that yet in any welcome to country. So thank you very much, Professor. That was terrific. And could I also make my own acknowledgements, of course, to Gordon and to the Premier, Mark McGowan, who's graced us with his presence, Stephen Chobo, the Minister for Defence Industry, Senator Linda Reynolds. I understand Christopher Pyne will be joining us. David Johnson, who's a former Defence Minister and the current Australian Defence Export Advocate. I understand Vice Admiral Michael Noonan will be joining us, and we have two Consul Generals, Rachel Cook of the United States, Amit Kumar Mishra, the Consul General of India. I want to give a special shout out to somebody who's unlikely to get otherwise mentioned, and that's General Jeff Sengelman. You're going to see later on today a truly brilliant piece of work. Without question, the best statement I've ever seen from a state government about where they wish to see direction go strategically and industrially. And he has been the government's advisor on this, and it shows the sharpness and precision of mind that he has. We have been indeed fortunate to have him at our service. In acknowledging the Indigenous Australians more broadly for their contribution to defence both in past and today, and this includes the 13 Aboriginal West Australians who served at Gallipoli, who had to circumvent the law to fight in the battle. It also goes in a shout out to the Northwest Mobile Force, headquartered in Darwin today, Norforce, which draws heavily on Indigenous expertise on remote lands. And of course, within that, our own Pilbara Regiment, headquartered at Karratha, and their leitmotif is Mintu Wanta, which means always alert. We are well guarded by our Indigenous people of the North. I want to do a special thank you too to the Perth US Asia Centre and Defence West for co-hosting this tremendous conference, which promises to be thought-provoking, and it is good to see such support from Canberra too, as evidenced by key federal ministers in attendance who join West Australia's leadership in recognition of the increasing importance of this state to not only the defence sector in the Indo-Pacific region, but the world's strategic outlook, and more on that later. I also noticed, and can't name them all, a slew, I don't know what you call it collectively, of federal and state members of parliament. And it's good to see them. I've always thought a coven of ministers is a nice plural, but there we are. Well, I've attended over the years tens of forums like this. Business-sponsored, academic-sponsored, politically-sponsored, militarily-sponsored, NGO-sponsored, government-sponsored. Usually, but not always, there is an industry underpinning. And when I was Minister for Defence, I recognised as my counterpart in industry, the late John Button, that the real industry minister of the Commonwealth is the Defence Industry Minister. The last bastion and launching pad of self-reliance, and having discovered that, the late John was a constant presence around me. He haunted me like a leprechaun. And he had a political reputation of dodging between the raindrops, and he did his rain dance on me. Now state governments recognise this defence industry centrality to Commonwealth industry policy and are moving accordingly. The Commonwealth in this industry sector spends upwards of $10 billion a year. That is not to be sneezed at. In my day, WA was different. Then the WA fascination was effective defence of our Western approaches. The only state which discussed national strategy and military strategy. The other states discussed production. Now WA does both, and this conference lays testament to this. And I believe we will see that combination of strategic thought and industrial endeavour in the state government's announcements today. However, This conference is taking place in a new circumstance. Most of the meetings I participated in, though serious, had an underlying atmospheric of unreality and distance. The global central contest was a long way away. The post-World War II liberal international order broadly acceptable. The American ally focused on alliance building and reassurance. The neighbourhood internally focused and capable of unlikely low-level threats. Our spending, at least this century, has been too low, but in the political circumstance, unremarkable. Now all that, in the great old Aussie expression, is on the wallaby. The old glue of global politics has wasted. Calculation of Allied direction, more difficult. The regional correlation of forces, as the Soviets used to say, used to calculate, shifting decisively against us. When I did the 1987 Defence White Paper, our GDP exceeded ASEAN's as a whole and was not too far off China's. Our GDP then was 70% of China's GDP. Can you imagine that? Now Indonesia's alone will pass us soon. Just as we can no longer be confident of the rules-based order, management of Allied relations has become equally more difficult. The diplomatic challenge has escalated. More so has the defence challenge. This conference is now the first I have attended where the urgency is obvious to all and not just a few. And there's no better place in Australia to do it than here. Complacency has always been less of a feature of our psyche than anywhere else on the continent. Notwithstanding the value of each jurisdiction offers Australia, this is the critical state. This is the state we need to get right. This state is the most vulnerable. This state where it is almost as problematic defending it as it is invading it. A state who was home to the largest US submarine base outside of Pearl during World War II, reflecting our strategic geography that is once again growing in importance. We now need to think operationally about the defence of our Western approaches. A world where the strategic leitmotif is the rule-based order is one where simple general strategy will do, where force majeure rules. The creation of facts by armed force or pressure is elevated in the rules of the game. And that juxtaposition is being amply demonstrated now in the South China Sea. Now, if we examine our strategic assets and vulnerabilities, no part of this country draws focus like WA. We are the world's greatest mineral province. As our trade picture has been dominated by iron ore, alumina, gold and energy resources, it has seemed a bit humdrum, even if it's vital. It is what is here for the next generation of industry that counts, the fourth industrial revolution. We have all the minerals which are required for battery and magnet technologies, all that underpins the metals that make new technologies work. We rightly love talking about lithium at the moment. We're just starting to talk about rare earths. The 17 elements on the periodic table are now the focal point of a strategic partnership on critical minerals between the United States and Australia. And WA, is the state who alone sits between China and Russia in terms of rare earth production. They're critical. In the case of the United States, more than 3,246 items, from satellites and nuclear weapons to joint strike fighters and pretty much anything beyond a rusty bayonet, WA rare earths can help to support a stable world economy as well. They're critical to the technology of today, and we cannot live without it. WA is now critical as a major source in potential and actuality, to a degree, at the moment. The alternative major producer, of course, and virtually now at this point of time, a global monopoly, is China. But if China is right about their projections for 2025, they'll need all the rare earths they've got for themselves. So that is a position that we are now in, which we must contemplate, and it's all here in Western Australia. History shows us you don't win wars without resources to wage and sustain battle. Resources can also galvanise a nation's diplomatic power, energise your industry and economy, or more soberly mark you as a target to be seized by others. It's incredible to think that one single mine a couple of hours' drive from Perth produces a third of the world's lithium, with WA expected to produce half of it soon. And when you think that the first heavy rare earth mine outside of China is gearing up in WA, when you think that as of last week only 17% of the state is under exploration for minerals, that foreshadows potentially many greater discoveries. When you think of all this, consider the strategic value of our state and its desirability to others in an atmospheric where global politics is driven by force majeure, not principle, not liberal internationalist principle, to seize it. The point is, we have such assets. How do we remove temptation? Well, how we do that is operational. What we do need to do is to deter, to permit our diplomacy to function unstressed. Here in WA at this conference, that is in effect one of the things that you are going to be thinking through. You'll be looking at the industry capabilities here. You'll be looking at what is on offer at the Australian Marine Complex in Henderson, a critical asset for the state and for the nation. You'll be looking probably to, I hope, in terms of encouraging our minerals industries to get involved with the new technologies of defence that we are going to be talking about. It's no accident one of the new producers here in terms of shipbuilding is Civmec, whose major purpose is the production of infrastructure for the mining industry. The miners don't actually know what they have. They don't know, for example, or they may know, but they don't see the strategic significance of it, that 70% of the world's capacity in terms of information production is produced here, 10 miles from here. This is an attribute which we have not yet fully thought through how we are to exploit it. And the software in that 70% is vital in potential. It already is for the development of artificial intelligence and robotisation. We have got to think more complex, in more complex ways, about the capabilities that we have. We are starting to do that. We are starting to make a contribution, for example, in cyber, out of Edith Cowan, which will be vital for the Commonwealth Defence Innovation Hub when it's up and going. I think we ought to be thinking too in terms of a DARPA. That's the Defence Advanced Research Project Agency that the Americans operate. So I am looking forward so much to the product here. You are here at a vital time, at a vital moment in Australian history, and you will contribute it vitally to how we long-term survive as a nation, and I declare you all open.